Now, in organizing your activities, you must look at a picture of the type of merchandise that you're importing. So I advise you that if you're importing footwear, then you need to look at the chapter where the footwear is classified and the allied section and chapter notes. And if that's all you're dealing with, then that is the extent of the knowledge that you need to have in the chapters of the tariff. However, you always need to know the contents of the general notes and the particular programs that you may be involved with there. Then if you have merchandise that falls across many sections and chapters, you need to identify that by priority so that you know the section and chapter notes that are associated with your import activities. It's not necessary to know footwear section and chapter notes if you're not importing footwear or wearing apparel. On the other hand, if that is the commodity that you're specializing in, then you need to know those section and chapter notes and of course the terms of the headings. This is the important part of General Rule of Interpretation number 1. Again, that rule of interpretation is going to provide you with the most results overall in the classification process. That is the rule that's going to be used a predominant amount of time in the process of classification. Now, the third part of that rule is that if you are not able to classify according to the terms of the headings and the section and chapter notes, then you are directed to follow the next rules of interpretation, General Rule of Interpretation 2. Before we go to that rule, let's look at a classification problem and apply General Rule of Interpretation number 1 to this problem. Suppose you have an importation of live horses. How would you go about classifying a live horse? First, you must know the nomenclature of your product. It's a live horse. Then you would go to the last part of the tariff book, to the alphabetical index, and you would look up horses. And you would find a listing in the tariff under horses, and that listing would be edible offal of, and then live. And live directs you to this heading, 0101. And that means 01 that you're going to go to Chapter 1 in the Harmonized Tariff System to heading 0101. And what you would do is go into tariff to that heading, 0101, and see the terms of that heading and see whether or not it covers your product. Now, you would look down in that heading, go into the subheading to further classify and fine-tune the classification of your horse. And what you will find is that that heading is broken down into live horses, asses, mules, and hennies under 0101. And then that heading is further broken down to subheadings, and the competing subheading is purebred breeding animals, and then there's further breakdown under that, and the competing provision versus purebred breeding animals is other. If they're not purebred breeding animals, they're going to fall in other. And they have further breakdowns for statistical purposes based upon their use and their application. But if our horse is a live horse, it's going to be classified in 0101. And then we would want to know further information for the classification of that horse as to the competing subheading provisions of purebred breeding animal and other, or other. And within those subheadings are further breakdowns, again for statistical purposes. Now, looking at general rule of interpretation, it tells us that we don't go by the titles of sections, chapters, and subchapters, not for legal purposes. That's only for ease of reference. The legal purposes is we go by the terms of the headings, and important is section and chapter notes that are associated with our product. Now, if we look at our section notes, we will see definitions in those notes of what's covered in this section, and we won't go into that in detail right now, but we will cover that later with further information. Chapter notes. Is it important to note that the chapter notes tell us some things that are covered and also things that are not covered in a chapter? Same thing with the section note. Throughout the tariff, the section notes will direct definitions of terms, also things that are covered and things that are not covered.